Episode of the Dog Mackintosh.
I was jerked from the dreamless by a sound like the rolling of distant thunder, and the mists of sleep clearing away was enabled to diagnose this and trace it to its source. It was my Aunt Agatha's dog Mackintosh, scratching at the door. The above, an Aberdeen terrier of weak intellect, had been left in my charge by the old relative while she went off to Aix-les-Bains to take the cure, and I'd never been able to make it see eye to eye with me on the subject of early rising. Although a glance at my watch informed me that it was barely 10, here was the animal absolutely up and about. I pressed the bell, and presently in shimmered Jeeves, complete with tea-tray and preceded by dog, which leaped upon the bed, licked me smartly in the right eye, and immediately curled up and fell into a deep slumber. And where the sense is in getting up at some ungodly hour of the morning and coming scratching at people's doors when you intend at the first opportunity to go to sleep again, beats me. Nevertheless, every day for the last 5 weeks this loony hound had pursued the same policy, and I confess I was getting a bit fed. There were 1 or 2 letters on the tray, and having slipped a refreshing half-cupful into the abyss, I felt equal to dealing with them. The one on top was from my Aunt Agatha. "Ha!" I said. "Sir?" I said "ha," Jeeves, and I meant ha. I was registering relief. My Aunt Agatha returns this evening. She'll be at her town residence between the hours of 6 and 7, and she expects to find Mackintosh waiting for her on the mat. "Indeed, sir. I shall miss the little fellow." I too, Jeeves, despite his habit of rising with the milk and being hearty before breakfast. There is sterling stuff in Mackintosh. Nevertheless, I can't but feel relieved at the prospect of shooting him back to the old home. It's been a guardianship fraught with anxiety. You know what my Aunt Agatha is. She lavishes on that dog a love which might better be bestowed on a nephew. And if the slightest thing had gone wrong with him while I was in loco parentis, if, while in my charge, he'd developed rabies or staggers or the bots, I should have been blamed. Very true, sir. And as you're aware, London is not big enough to hold Aunt Agatha and anybody she happens to be blaming. I'd opened the second letter and was giving it the eye. "Ha!" I said. "Sir?" Once again I said "ha," Jeeves, but this time signifying mild surprise. "This letter is from Miss Wickham." "Indeed, sir." I sensed, if that's the word I want, the note of concern in the man's voice, and I knew he was saying to himself, "Is the young master about to slip?" You see, there was a time when the Wooster heart was, to some extent, what you might call ensnared by this Roberta Wickham, and Jeeves had never approved of her. He considered her volatile and frivolous, and more or less of a menace to man and beast, and offence, I'm bound to say, had rather borne out his view. "She wants me to give her lunch today." "Indeed, sir." "And 2 friends of hers." "Indeed, sir." "Here, at 1:30. "Indeed, sir." I was piqued. "Correct this parrot complex, Jeeves," I said, waving a slice of bread and butter rather sternly at the man. "There's no need for you to stand there saying, 'Indeed, sir.' I know what you're thinking, and you're wrong. As far as Miss Wickham is concerned, Bertram Wooster is chilled steel. I see no earthly reason why I shouldn't comply with this request. A Wooster may have ceased to love, but he can still be civil." "Very good, sir." "Employ the rest of the morning, then, in buzzing to and fro and collecting provender. The old King Wenceslas touch, Jeeves. You remember, bring me fish and bring me fowl, bring me flesh and bring me wine, sir. Just as you say, you know best. Oh, and roly-poly pudding, Jeeves." "Sir?" "Roly-poly pudding with lots of jam in it. Miss Wickham specifically mentions this. Mysterious, what?" "Extremely, sir. Also oysters, ice cream, and plenty of chocolates with that gooey, slithery stuff in the middle. Makes you sick to think of it, eh?" "Yes, sir. Me too. But that's what she says. I think she must be on some kind of diet." "Well, be that as it may, see to it, Jeeves, will you?" "Yes, sir. At 1:30 of the clock." "Very good, sir." "Very good, Jeeves." At 12:30 I took the dog Mackintosh for his morning saunter in the park, and returning at about 1:10 found young Bobby Wickham in the sitting-room, smoking a cigarette and chatting to Jeeves, who seemed a bit distant, I thought. I have an idea I've told you about this Bobby Wickham. She was the red-haired girl who let me down so disgracefully in the sinister affair of Tuppy Glossop and the hot water bottle, that Christmas when I went to stay at Skelding's Hall, her mother's place in Hertfordshire. Her mother is Lady Wickham, who writes novels which I believe command a ready sale among those who like their literature pretty sloppy. A formidable old bird, rather like my Aunt Agatha in appearance. Bobby doesn't resemble her, being constructed more on the lines of Clara Bow. She greeted me cordially as I entered, in fact so cordially that I saw Jeeves pause at the door before biffing off to mix the cocktails and shoot me the sort of grave warning look a wise old father might pass out to the effervescent son on seeing him going fairly strong with the local vamp. I nodded back, as much as to say, "Chilled steel," and he oozed out, leaving me to play the sparkling host. "It was awfully sporting of you to give us this lunch, Bertie," said Bobby. "Don't mention it, my dear old thing," I said. "Always a pleasure. You got all the stuff I told you about?" "The garbage, as specified, is in the kitchen. But since when have you become a roly-poly pudding addict?" "That isn't for me. There's a small boy coming." "What?" "I'm awfully sorry," she said, noting my agitation. "I know just how you feel, and I'm not going to pretend that this child isn't pretty near the edge. In fact, he has to be seen to be believed, but it's simply vital that he be cosseted and sucked up to and generally treated as the guest of honour, because everything depends on him." "How do you mean?" "I'll tell you. You know Mother?" "Whose mother?" "My mother." "Oh, yes, I thought you meant the kid's mother." "He hasn't got a mother, only a father who's a big theatrical manager in America. I met him at a party the other night." "The father?" "Yes, the father. Not the kid." "No, not the kid." "Right, all clear so far. Proceed." "Well, my mother, has dramatized one of her novels, and when I met this father, this theatrical manager, and between ourselves made rather a hit with him, I said to myself, why not?" "Why not what?" "Why not plant Mother's play on him?" "Your mother's play?" "Yes, not his mother's play. He's like his son, he hasn't got a mother either. These things run in families, don't they? You see, Bertie, what was one thing and another, my stock isn't very high with Mother just now. There was that matter of my smashing up the car, and several things. So I thought, here is where I get a chance to put myself right. I cooed to old Blumenfield. Name sounds familiar. Oh, yes, he's a big man over in America. He's come to London to see if there's anything in the play line worth buying. So I cooed to him a goodish bit, and then asked him if he'd listen to Mother's play. He said he would, so I asked him to come to lunch, and I'd read it to him." "You're going to read your mother's play here?" I said, paling. "Yes." "My God!" "I know what you mean," she said. "I admit it's pretty sticky stuff, but I've an idea that I shall put it over. It all depends on how the kid likes it. You see, old Blumenfield, for some reason, always banks on his verdict. I suppose he thinks the child's intelligence is exactly the same as an average audience's, and—" I uttered a slight yelp, causing Jeeves, who had entered with the cocktails, to look at me in a pained sort of way. I had remembered. "Jeeves!" "Sir?" "Do you recollect when we were in New York, a dished-faced kid of the name of Blumenfield, who on a memorable occasion snooted Cyril Bassington when the latter tried to go on to the stage?" "Very vividly, sir." "Well, prepare yourself for a shock. He's coming to lunch." "Indeed, sir." "I'm glad you can speak in that light, careless way. I only met the young stoop of arsenic for a few brief minutes, but I don't mind telling you, the prospect of hobnobbing with him again makes me tremble like a leaf." "Indeed, sir." "Don't keep saying indeed, sir. You've seen this kid in action, and you know what he's like. He told Cyril Bassington, a fellow to whom he'd never been formally introduced, that he had a face like a fish, and this not 30 seconds after their initial meeting. I give you fair warning that if he tells me I have a face like a fish, I shall clump his head." "Bertie!" cried the Wickham, contorted with anguish and apprehension and what not. "Yes, I shall." "Then you'll simply ruin the whole thing." "I don't care. We Woosters have our pride." "Perhaps the young gentleman won't notice that you have a face like a fish, sir," suggested Jeeves. "Ah, there's that, of course." "But we can't just trust to luck," said Bobby. "It's probably the first thing you'll notice." "In that case, miss," said Jeeves, "it might be the best plan if Mr. Wooster did not attend the luncheon." I beamed on the man. As always, he had found the way. "But Mr. Blumenfield will think it so odd." "Well, tell him I'm eccentric. Tell him I have these moods which come upon me quite suddenly when I can't stand the sight of people. Tell him what you like. He'll be offended. not half so offended as if I socked his son on the upper maxillary bone. "I really think it would be the best plan, miss." "Oh, all right," said Bobby. "Push off, then. But I wanted you to be here to listen to the play and laugh in the proper places." "I don't suppose there are any proper places," I said. And with these words I reached the hall in 2 bounds, grabbed a hat, and made for the street. A cab was just pulling up at the door as I reached it, and inside were Pop Blumenfield and his foul son. With a slight sinking of the old heart, I saw that the kid had recognized me. "Hello," he said. "Hello," I said. "Where are you off to?" said the kid. "Ha ha," I said, and legged it for the great open spaces. I lunched at the Drones, doing myself fairly well, and lingering pretty considerably over the coffee and cigarettes. At 4 o'clock I thought it would be safe to think about getting back, but not wishing to take any chances, I went to the phone and rang up the flat. "All clear, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir." "Blumenfield Jr. nowhere about?" "No, sir." "Not hiding in any nook or cranny, what?" "No, sir." "How did everything go off?" "Quite satisfactorily, I fancy, sir." "Was I missed?" "I think Mr. Blumenfield and young Master Blumenfield were somewhat surprised at your absence, sir. Apparently they encountered you as you were leaving the building." "They did. An awkward moment, Jeeves. The kid appeared to desire speech with me, but I laughed hollowly and passed on. Did they comment on this at all?" "Yes, sir. Indeed, young Master Blumenfield was somewhat outspoken." "What did he say?" "I can't recall his exact words, sir, but he drew a comparison between your mentality and that of a cuckoo." "A cuckoo, eh?" "Yes, sir. To the bird's advantage." "He did he? Now you see how right I was to come away. Just one crack like that out of him face to face, and I should infallibly have done his upper maxillary a bit of no good. It was wise of you to suggest that I should lunch out." "Thank you, sir." "Well, the coast being clear, I will now return home." Before you start, sir, perhaps you would ring Miss Wickham up. She instructed me to desire you to do so." "You mean she asked you to ask me?" "Precisely, sir." "Righto. And the number?" "Sloane 8090. I fancy it is the residence of Miss Wickham's aunt in Eaton Square." I got the number, and presently young Bobby's voice came floating over the wire. From the timbre I gathered that she was extremely bucked. "Hello, is that you, Bertie?" "In person. What's the news?" "Wonderful. Everything went off splendidly. The lunch was just right. The child stuffed himself to the eyebrows and got more and more amiable, till by the time he had had his 3rd go of ice cream he was ready to say that any play, even one of my mother's, was the goods. I fired it at him before he could come out from under the influence, and he sat there absorbing it in a sort of gorged way, and at the end old Blumenfield said, 'Well, sonny, how about it?' And the child gave a sort of faint smile, as if he was thinking about roly-poly pudding, and said, 'Okay, Pop,' and that's all there was to it. Old Blumenfield has taken him off to the movies, and I'm to look in at the Savoy at 5:30 to sign the contract. I've just been talking to Mother on the phone, and she's quite consumedly braced." "Terrific. I knew you'd be pleased. Oh, Bertie, there's just one thing. You remember saying to me once that there wasn't anything in the world you wouldn't do for me?" I paused, a trifle warily. It's true that I had expressed myself in some such terms as she had indicated, but that was before the affair of Tuppy and the hot water bottle, and in the calmer frame of mind induced by that episode I wasn't feeling quite so spacious. You know how it is. Love's flame flickers and dies, reason returns to her throne, and you aren't nearly as ready to hop about and jump through hoops as in the first pristine glow of the divine passion. "What do you want me to do?" "Well, it's nothing I actually want you to do. It's something I've done that I hope you won't be sticky about. Just before I began reading the play, that dog of yours, the Aberdeen Terrier, came into the room. The child Blumenfield was very much taken with it, and said he wished he had a dog like that, looking at me in a meaning sort of way, so naturally I had to say, 'Oh, I'll give you this one.'" I swayed somewhat. You... what was that?" "I gave him the dog. I knew you wouldn't mind. You see, it was vital to keep cosseting him. If I'd refused, he'd have cut up rough, and all that roly-poly pudding and stuff would have been thrown away. You see—" I hung up. The jaw had fallen, the eyes were protruding. I tottered from the booth, and reeling out of the club, hailed a taxi. I got to the flat and yelled for Jeeves. "Jeeves, sir? Do you know what?" "No, sir." "The dog, my Aunt Agatha's dog, Mackintosh." "I haven't seen him for some little while, sir. He left me after the conclusion of luncheon. Possibly he is in your bedroom." "Yes, and possibly he jolly dashed well isn't. If you want to know where he is, he's in a suite at the Savoy." "Sir?" "Miss Wickham has just told me she gave him to Blumenfield Jr." "Sir?" "Gave him to Jumenfield Blunier, I tell you. As a present, as a gift, with warm personal regards." "What was her motive in doing that, sir?" I explained the circs. Jeeves did a bit of respectful tongue-clicking. "I have always maintained, if you'll remember, sir," he said when I'd finished, "that Miss Wickham, though a charming young lady—" "Yes, never mind about that. What are we going to do? That's the point. Aunt Agatha is due back between the hours of 6 and 7. She will find herself short one Aberdeen terrier. And as she'll probably have been considerably seasick all the way over, you will readily perceive, Jeeves, that when I break the news that her dog has been given away to a total stranger, I shall find her in no mood of gentle charity." "I see, sir. Most disturbing." "What did you say it was?" "Most disturbing, sir." I snorted a trifle. "Oh," I said, "and I suppose if you'd been in San Francisco when the earthquake started, you would just have lifted up your finger and said, 'Tweet, tweet, shush, shush, now, come, come. The English language, they used to tell me at school, is the richest in the world, crammed full from end to end with about 1,000,000 red-hot adjectives. Yet the only one you can find to describe the ghastly business is the adjective disturbing. It isn't disturbing, Jeeves, it's... what's the word I want? Cataclysmal, sir." "I shouldn't wonder. Well, what's to be done?" "I will bring you a whisky and soda, sir." "What's the good of that?" "It will refresh you, sir, and in the meantime, if it is your wish, I will give the matter consideration." "Carry on." "Very good, sir. I assume that it is not your desire to do anything that may in any way jeopardize the cordial relations which now exist between Miss Wickham and Master and Mr. Blumenfield? Eh? You wouldn't, for example, contemplate proceeding to the Savoy Hotel and demanding the return of the dog?" It was a tempting thought, but I shook the old onion firmly. There are things which a Wooster can do, and things which, if you follow me, a Wooster cannot do. The procedure which he had indicated would undoubtedly have brought home the bacon, but the thwarted kid would have been bound to turn nasty and change his mind about the play. And while I didn't think that any drama written by Bobby's mother was likely to do the theatre-going public much good, I couldn't dash the cup of happiness, so to speak, from the blighted girl's lips, as it were. Noblesse oblige about sums the thing up. "No, Jeeves," I said, "but if you can think of some way by which I can oil privily into the suite and sneak the animal out of it without causing any hard feelings, spill it." "I will endeavour to do so, sir." "Snap into it, then, without delay. They say fish are good for the brain. Have a go at the sardines, and come back and report." "Very good, sir." It was about 10 minutes later that he entered the presence once more. "I fancy, sir—" "Yes, Jeeves?" "I rather fancy, sir, that I have discovered a plan of action. Or scheme. Or scheme, sir. A plan of action or scheme which will meet the situation. If I understood you rightly, sir, Mr. and Master Blumenfield have attended a motion picture performance." "Correct. In which case they should not return to the hotel before 5:15. "Correct once more. Miss Wickham is scheduled to blow in at 5:30 to sign the contract. The suite, therefore, is at present unoccupied." "Except for Mackintosh." "Except for Mackintosh, sir. Everything accordingly must depend on whether Mr. Blumenfield left instructions that in the event of her arriving before he did, Miss Wickham was to be shown straight up to the suite to await his return." "Why does everything depend on that?" "Should he have done so, the matter becomes quite simple. All that is necessary is that Miss Wickham shall present herself at the hotel at 5 o'clock. She will go up to the suite. You will also have arrived at the hotel at 5, sir, and will have made your way to the corridor outside the suite. If Mr. and Master Blumenfield have not returned, Miss Wickham will open the door and come out, and you will go in, secure the dog, and take your departure." I stared at the man. "How many tins of sardines did you eat, Jeeves?" None, sir. I am not fond of sardines." "You mean you thought of this great, this ripe, this amazing scheme entirely without the impetus given to the brain by fish?" "Yes, sir." "You stand alone, Jeeves." "Thank you, sir. But I say, sir, suppose the dog won't come away with me? You know how meagre his intelligence is. By this time, especially when he's got used to a new place, he may have forgotten me completely and will look on me as a perfect stranger." "I had thought of that, sir. The most judicious move will be for you to sprinkle your trousers with aniseed." "Aniseed?" "Yes, sir. It is extensively used in the dog-stealing industry." "But, Jeeves, dash it! Aniseed?" "I consider it essential, sir." "But where do you get the stuff?" "At any chemist's, sir. If you will go out now and procure a small bottle, I will be telephoning to Miss Wickham to apprise her of the contemplated arrangements and ascertain whether she is to be admitted to the suite." I don't know what the record is for popping out and buying aniseed, but I should think I hold it. The thought of Aunt Agatha getting nearer and nearer to the metropolis every minute induced a rare burst of speed. I was back at the flat so quick that I nearly met myself coming out. Jeeves had good news. "Everything is perfectly satisfactory, sir. Mr. Blumenfield did leave instructions that Miss Wickham was to be admitted to his suite. The young lady is now on her way to the hotel. By the time you reach it, you will find her there." You know, whatever you may say against old Jeeves, and I for one have never wavered in my opinion that his views on shirts for evening wear are hidebound and reactionary to a degree, you've got to admit that the man can plan a campaign. Napoleon could have taken his correspondence course. When he sketches out a scheme, all you have to do is to follow it in every detail, and there you are. On the present occasion, everything went absolutely according to plan. I'd never realized before that dog-stealing could be so simple, having always regarded it rather as something that called for the ice-cool brain and the nerve of steel. I see now that a child can do it, if directed by Jeeves. I got to the hotel, sneaked up the stairs, hung about in the corridor trying to look like a potted palm in case anybody came along, and presently the door of the suite opened and Bobby appeared, and suddenly, as I approached, out shot Mackintosh, sniffing passionately, and the next moment his nose was up against my spring trouserings, and he was drinking me in with every evidence of enjoyment. If I'd been a bird that had been dead about 5 days, he couldn't have nuzzled me more heartily. Aniseed isn't a scent that I care for particularly myself, but it seemed to speak straight to the deeps in Mackintosh's soul. The connection, as it were, having been established in this manner, the rest was simple. I merely withdrew, followed by the animal in the order named. We passed down the stairs in good shape, self reeking to heaven and animal inhaling the bouquet, and after a few anxious moments was safe in a cab, homeward bound. As smooth a bit of work as London had seen that day. Arrived at the flat, I handed Mackintosh to Jeeves, and instructed him to shut him up in the bathroom or somewhere where the spell cast by my trousers would cease to operate. This done, I again paid the man a marked tribute. "Jeeves," I said, "I have had the occasion to express the view before, and I now express it again, fearlessly. You stand in a class of your own." "Thank you very much, sir. I'm glad that everything proceeded satisfactorily." The festivities went like a breeze from start to finish. "Tell me, were you always like this, or did it come on suddenly?" "Sir?" "The brain, the grey matter. Were you an outstandingly brilliant boy?" "My mother thought me intelligent, sir." "You can't go by that. My mother thought me intelligent. Anyway, setting that aside for the moment, would a fiver be any use to you?" "Thank you very much, sir." Not that a fiver begins to cover it. Figure to yourself, Jeeves. Try to envisage, if you follow what I mean, the probable behaviour of my Aunt Agatha if I'd gone to her between the hours of 6 and 7 and told her that Mackintosh had passed out of the picture. I should have had to leave London and grow a beard. I can readily imagine, sir, that she would have been somewhat perturbed. She would, and on the occasions when my Aunt Agatha is perturbed, heroes dive down drain-pipes to get out of her way. However, as it is, all has ended happily. "Oh, great Scott!" "Sir?" I hesitated. It seemed a shame to cast a damper on the man just when he'd extended himself so notably in the cause, but it had to be done. "You've overlooked something, Jeeves." "Surely not, sir." "Yes, Jeeves, I regret to say that the late scheme or plan of action, while gilt-edged as far as I'm concerned, has rather landed Miss Wickham in the cart." "In what way, sir?" "Why, don't you see that if they know that she was in the suite at the time of the outrage, the Blumenfields, father and son, will instantly assume that she was mixed up in Mackintosh's disappearance, with the result that in their pique and chagrin they will call off the deal about the play. I'm surprised at you not spotting that, Jeeves. You'd have done much better to eat those sardines as I advised." I waggled the head rather sadly, and at this moment there was a ring at the front doorbell. And not an ordinary ring, mind you, but one of those resounding peals that suggest that somebody with a high blood pressure and a grievance stands without. I leaped in my tracks. My busy afternoon had left the old nervous system not quite in mid-season form. "Good Lord, Jeeves!" "Somebody at the door, sir." "Yes." "Probably Mr. Blumenfield Senior, sir." "What?" "He rang up on the telephone, sir, shortly before you returned, to say that he was about to pay you a call." "You don't mean that?" "Yes, sir." "Advise me, Jeeves." "I fancy the most judicious procedure would be for you to conceal yourself behind the settee, sir." I saw that his advice was good. I'd never met this Blumenfield socially, but I'd seen him from afar on the occasion when he and Cyril Bassington had had their falling out, and he hadn't struck me then as a bloke with whom, if in one of his emotional moods, it would be at all agreeable to be shut up with in a small room. A large, round, flat, overflowing bird who might quite easily, if stirred, fall on a fellow and flatten him to the carpet. So I nestled behind the settee, and in about 5 seconds there was a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and something extraordinarily substantial bounded into the sitting-room. "This guy Wooster," bellowed a voice that had been strengthened by a lifetime of ticking actors off at dress rehearsals from the back of the theatre. "Where is he?" Jeeves continued suave. "I couldn't say, sir." "He sneaked my son's dog." "Indeed, sir." "Walked into my suite as cool as damn it and took the animal away." "Most disturbing, sir." "And you don't know where he is?" "Mr. Wooster may be anywhere, sir. He is uncertain in his movements." The bloke Blumenfield gave a loud sniff. "Odd smell here." "Yes, sir." "What is it?"
"Aniseed, sir."
"Aniseed?"
"Yes, sir. Mr. Wooster sprinkles it on his trousers."
"Sprinkles it on his trousers?"
"Yes, sir."
"What on earth does he do that for?"
"I could not say, sir. Mr. Wooster's motives are always somewhat hard to follow. He is eccentric."
"Eccentric? He must be a loony."
"Yes, sir."
"You mean he is?"
"Yes, sir." There was a pause, a long one.
"Oh," said old Blumenfield, and it seemed to me that a good deal of what you might call the vim had gone out of his voice. He paused again. "Not dangerous?"
"Yes, sir, when roused."
What rouses him, chiefly?"
"One of Mr. Wooster's peculiarities is that he doesn't like the sight of gentlemen of full habit, sir. They seem to infuriate him."
"You mean fat men?"
"Yes, sir."
"Why?"
"One cannot say, sir." There was another pause.
"I'm fat," said old Blumenfield in a rather pensive sort of voice.
"I wouldn't have ventured to suggest it myself, sir, but as you say so, you may recollect that on being informed that you were to be a member of the luncheon party, Mr. Wooster, doubting his power of self-control, refused to be present."
"That's right. He went rushing out just as I arrived. I thought it odd at the time. My son thought it odd. We both thought it odd."
"Yes, sir. Mr. Wooster, I imagine, wished to avoid any possible unpleasantness such as has occurred before. With regard to the smell of aniseed, sir, I fancy I have now located it. Unless I am mistaken, it proceeds from behind the settee. No doubt Mr. Wooster is sleeping there."
"Doing what?"
"Sleeping, sir."
"Does he often sleep on the floor?"
"Most afternoons, sir. Would you desire me to wake him?"
"No."
"I thought you had something that you wished to say to Mr. Wooster, sir."
Old Blumenfield drew a deep breath. "So did I," he said, "but I find I haven't. Just get me alive out of here, that's all I ask." I heard the door close, and a little while later the front door banged.
I crawled out. It hadn't been any too cosy behind the settee, and I was glad to be elsewhere. Jeeves came trickling back. "Gone, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir." I bestowed an approving look on him. "One of your best efforts, Jeeves." "Thank you, sir." "But what beats me is why he ever came here. What made him think that I'd sneaked Mackintosh away?" "I took the liberty of recommending Miss Wickham to tell Mr. Blumenfield that she observed you removing the animal from his suite, sir. The point which you raised regarding the possibility of her being suspected of complicity in the affair had not escaped me. It seemed to me that this would establish her solidly in Mr. Blumenfield's good opinion." "I see. Risky, of course, but possibly justified. Yes, on the whole, justified. What's that you've got there?" "A £5 note, sir." "Ah, the one I gave you?" "No, sir, the one Mr. Blumenfield gave me." "Eh? Why did he give you a fiver?" "He very kindly presented it to me on my handing him the dog, sir." I gaped at the man. "You don't mean to say—" "Not Mackintosh, sir. Mackintosh is at present in my bedroom. This was another animal of the same species which I purchased at the shop in Bond Street during your absence. Except to the eye of love, one Aberdeen Terrier looks very much like another Aberdeen Terrier, sir. Mr. Blumenfield, I'm happy to say, did not detect the innocent subterfuge." "Jeeves," I said, and I'm not ashamed to confess that there was a spot of chokiness in the voice, "there's none like you." "None." "Thank you very much, sir. Owing solely to the fact that your head bulges in unexpected spots, thus enabling you to do about twice as much bright thinking in any given time as any other two men in existence, happiness, you might say, reigns supreme. Aunt Agatha is on velvet, I am on velvet, the Wickhams, mother and daughter, are on velvet, the Blumenfields, father and son, are on velvet. As far as the eye can reach, a solid mass of humanity owing to you, all on velvet. A fiver is not sufficient, Jeeves. If I thought the world thought that Bertram Wooster thought a measly £5 an adequate reward for such services as yours, I should never hold my head up again. Have another." "Thank you, sir." "And one more." "Thank you very much, sir." "And a third, for luck?" "Really, sir, I am exceedingly obliged. Excuse me, sir, I fancy I heard the telephone." He pushed out into the hall, and I heard him doing a good deal of the "yes, madam, certainly, madam" stuff. Then he came back. "Mrs. Spencer Gregson on the telephone, sir." "Aunt Agatha?" "Yes, sir. Speaking from Victoria Station. She desires to communicate with you with reference to the dog Mackintosh. I gather that she wishes to hear from your own lips that all is well with the little fellow, sir." I straightened the tie, I pulled down the waistcoat, I shot the cuffs, I felt absolutely all righto. "Lead me to her," I said.
This ends episode of The Dog Mackintosh. The Spot of Art.
I was lunching at my Aunt Dahlia's, and despite the fact that Anatole, her outstanding cook, had rather excelled himself in the matter of the bill of fare, I'm bound to say the food was more or less turning to ashes in my mouth. You see, I had some bad news to break to her, always a prospect that takes the edge off the appetite. She wouldn't be pleased, I knew, and when not pleased, Aunt Dahlia, having spent most of her youth in the hunting field, has a crispish way of expressing herself. However, I supposed I had better have a dash at it and get it over. "Aunt Dahlia," I said, facing the issue squarely. "Hello? You know that cruise of yours?" "Yes." "That yachting cruise you're planning?" "Yes." "That jolly cruise in your yacht in the Mediterranean, to which you so kindly invited me, and to which I've been looking forward with such keen anticipation." "Get on, fathead, what about it?" I swallowed a chunk of côtelette suprême au chou-fleur and slipped her the distressing info. "I'm frightfully sorry, Aunt Dahlia," I said, "but I shan't be able to come." As I'd foreseen, she goggled. "What? I'm afraid not." "You poor miserable hellhound, what do you mean you won't be able to come?" Well, I won't." "Why not?" "Matters of the most extreme urgency render my presence in the metropolis imperative." She sniffed. "I suppose what you really mean is that you're hanging round some unfortunate girl again." I didn't like the way she put it, but I admit I was stunned by her penetration, if that's the word I want. I mean, the sort of thing detectives have. "Yes, Aunt Dahlia," I said, "you've guessed my secret. I do indeed love." "Who is she?" "Miss Pendlebury. Christian name Gladys. She spells it with a W." "With a G, you mean?" "With a W and a G. Not Gwladys. "That's it." The relative uttered a yowl. "You sit there and tell me you haven't enough sense to steer clear of a girl who calls herself Gladys? Listen, Bertie," said Aunt Dahlia earnestly, "I'm an older woman than you are. Well, you know what I mean. And I can tell you a thing or two, and one of them is that no good can come of association with anything labelled Gladys, or Isabel with a Y, or Ethel with a Y, or Maybelle, or Catherine, but particularly Gladys. What sort of girl is she?" "Slightly divine." "She isn't that female I saw driving you at 60 miles ph in the park the other day, in a red two-seater?" "She did drive me in the park the other day. I thought it a rather hopeful sign, and her Ch5-7 is red." Aunt Dahlia looked relieved. "Oh, well, then she'll probably break your silly fat neck before she can get you to the altar. That's some consolation. Where did you meet her?" "At a party in Chelsea. She's an artist." "Ye gods!" "And swings a jolly fine brush, let me tell you. She's painted a portrait of me. Jeeves and I hung it up in the flat this morning. I have an idea Jeeves doesn't like it." "Well, if it's anything like you, I don't see why he should. An artist calls herself Gladys and drives a car in the sort of way Seagrave would if he were pressed for time." She brooded a while. "Well, it's all very sad, but I can't see why you won't come on the yacht." I explained. "It would be madness to leave them a trop at this juncture," I said. "You know what girls are. They forget the absent face. And I'm not at all easy in my mind about a certain cove of the name of Lucius Pym. Apart from the fact that he's an artist too, which forms a bond, his hair waves. One must never discount wavy hair, Aunt Dahlia. Moreover, this bloke is one of those strong, masterful men. He treats Gladys as if she were less than the dust beneath his taxi wheels. He criticizes her hats and says nasty things about her chiaroscuro. For some reason, I've often noticed, this always seems to fascinate girls, and it's sometimes occurred to me that, being myself more the parfait gentle knight, if you know what I mean, I'm in grave danger of getting the short end. Taking all these things into consideration, then, I can't breeze off to the Mediterranean, leaving this Pym a clear field. You must see that." Aunt Dahlia laughed, rather a nasty laugh, scorn in its timbre, or so it seemed to me. "I shouldn't worry," she said. "You don't suppose for a moment that Jeeves will sanction the match?" I was stung. "Do you imply, Aunt Dahlia," I said, and I can't remember if I rapped the table with the handle of my fork or not, but I rather think I did, that I allowed Jeeves to boss me to the extent of stopping me marrying somebody I want to marry?" "Well, he stopped you wearing a moustache, didn't he? And purple socks, and soft-fronted shirts with dress clothes." "That's a different matter altogether." "Well, I'm prepared to make a small bet with you, Bertie. Jeeves will stop this match." "What absolute rot!" "And if he doesn't like that portrait, he'll get rid of it." "I never heard such dashed nonsense in my life." "And finally, you wretched pie-faced wambler, he'll present you on board my yacht at the appointed hour. I don't know how he'll do it, but you'll be there, all complete with yachting cap and spare pair of socks." "Let's change the subject, Aunt Dahlia," I said coldly. Being a good deal stirred up by the attitude of the flesh and blood at the luncheon table, I had to go for a bit of a walk in the park after leaving to soothe the nervous system. By about 4:30 the ganglions had ceased to vibrate, and I returned to the flat. Jeeves was in the sitting-room looking at the portrait. This must have been one of Nelson's tars or something, for he's always had the urge of the salt sea in his blood. I've noticed him on liners when we were going to America, striding the deck with a sailorly roll and giving the distinct impression of being just about to heave the main-brace or splice the binnacle. So, though I had explained my reasons, taking the man fully into my confidence and concealing nothing, I knew that he was distinctly peeved, and my first act on entering was to do the cheery a bit. I joined him in front of the portrait. "Looks good, Jeeves, what?" "Yes, sir." "Nothing like a spot of art for brightening the home?" "No, sir." "Seems to lend the room a certain, what shall I say?" "Yes, sir." The responses were all right, but his manner was far from hearty, and I decided to tackle him squarely. I mean, dash it, I don't know if you've ever had your portrait painted, but if you have, you'll understand my feelings. The spectacle of one's portrait hanging on the wall creates in one a sort of paternal fondness for the thing. And what you demand from the outside public is approval and enthusiasm, not the curling lip, the twitching nostril, and the kind of supercilious look which you see in the eye of a dead mackerel. Especially is this so when the artist is a girl for whom you have conceived sentiments deeper and warmer than those of ordinary friendship. "Jeeves," I said, "you don't like this spot of art?" "Oh, yes, sir. No, subterfuge is useless. I can read you like a book. For some reason this spot of art fails to appeal to you. What do you object to about it?" "Is not the colour scheme a trifle bright, sir?" "I hadn't observed it, Jeeves. Anything else?" "Well, in my opinion, sir, Miss Pendlebury has given you a somewhat too hungry expression." "Hungry?" "A little like that of a dog regarding a distant bone, sir." I checked the fellow. "There's no resemblance whatever, Jeeves, to a dog regarding a distant bone. The look to which you allude is wistful, and denotes soul." "I see, sir." I proceeded to another subject. "Miss Pendlebury said she might look in this afternoon to inspect the portrait. Did she turn up?" "Yes, sir." "But has left?" "Yes, sir." "You mean she's gone, what?" "Precisely, sir." "She didn't say anything about coming back, I suppose?" "No, sir. I received the impression that it was not Miss Pendlebury's intention to return. She was a little upset, sir, and expressed a desire to go to her studio and rest." "Upset? What was she upset about?" "The accident, sir." I didn't actually clutch the brow, but I did a bit of mental brow-clutching, as it were. "Don't tell me she's had an accident." "Yes, sir." "What sort of accident?" "Automobile, sir." "Was she hurt?" "No, sir, only the gentleman." "What gentleman?" "Miss Pendlebury had the misfortune to run over a gentleman in her car almost immediately opposite this building. He sustained a slight fracture of the leg." "Too bad. But Miss Pendlebury's all right." "Physically, sir, her condition appeared to be satisfactory. She was suffering a certain distress of mind." "Of course, with her beautiful, sympathetic nature, naturally. It's a hard world for a girl, Jeeves, with fellows flinging themselves under the wheels of her car in one long, unending stream. It must have been a great shock to her. What became of the chump?" "The gentleman, sir?" "Yes." "He's in your spare bedroom, sir." "What?" "Yes, sir." "In my spare bedroom?" "Yes, sir. It was Miss Pendlebury's desire that he should be taken there. She instructed me to telegraph to the gentleman's sister, sir, who is in Paris, advising her of the accident. I also summoned a medical man who gave it as his opinion that the patient should remain for the time being in statu quo." "You mean the corpse is on the premises for an indefinite visit?" "Yes, sir." "Jeeves, this is a bit thick." "Yes, sir." "And I meant it, dash it. I mean to say, a girl can be pretty heftily divine and ensnare the heart and what-not, but she's no right to turn a fellow's flat into a morgue." I'm bound to say that for a moment passion ebbed a trifle. "Well, I suppose I'd better go and introduce myself to the blighter. After all, I am his host. Has he a name?" "Mr. Pym, sir." "Pym?" "Yes, sir, and the young lady addressed him as Lucius. It was owing to the fact that he was on his way here to examine the portrait which she had painted that Mr. Pym happened to be in the roadway at the moment when Miss Pendlebury turned the corner." I headed for the spare bedroom. I was perturbed to a degree. I don't know if you've ever loved and been handicapped in your wooing by a wavy-haired rival, but one of the things you don't want in such cirques is the rival parking himself on the premises with a broken leg. Apart from anything else, the advantage the position gives him is obviously terrific. There he is, sitting up and toying with a grape and looking pale and interesting, the object of the girl's pity and concern, and where do you get off, bounding about the place in morning costume and spats and with the rude flush of health on the cheek? It seemed to me that things were beginning to look pretty mouldy. I found Lucius Pym lying in bed, draped in a suit of my pyjamas, smoking one of my cigarettes and reading a detective story. He waved the cigarette at me in what I considered a dashed, patronizing manner. "Ah, Wooster," he said. "Not so much of the Wooster," I replied, brusquely. "How soon can you be moved?" In a week or so, I fancy. In a week or so. For the moment, the doctor insists on perfect quiet and repose, so forgive me, old man, for asking you not to raise your voice. A hushed whisper is the stuff to give the troops. And now, Wooster, about this accident. We must come to an understanding. Are you sure you can't be moved? Quite. The doctor said so. I think we ought to get a second opinion. Useless, my dear fellow. He was most emphatic, and evidently a man who knew his job. Don't worry about my not being comfortable here. I shall be quite all right. I like this bed. And now to return to the subject of this accident. My sister will be arriving tomorrow. She will be greatly upset. I am her favourite brother. You are? I am. How many of you are there? 6. And you're her favourite? I am. It seemed to me that the other 5 must be pretty fairly subhuman, but I didn't say so. We Woosters can curb the tongue. She married a bird named Slingsby. Slingsby's superb soups. He rolls in money, but do you think I can get him to lend a trifle from time to time to a needy brother-in-law? Said Lucius Pym bitterly. No, sir. However, that is neither here nor there. The point is that my sister loves me devotedly, and this being the case, she might try to prosecute and persecute and generally bite pieces out of poor little Gladys if she knew that it was she who was driving the car that laid me out. She must never know, Wooster. I appeal to you as a man of honour to keep your mouth shut. Naturally. I'm glad you grasped the point so readily, Wooster. You're not the fool people take you for. Who takes me for a fool? The Pym raised his eyebrows slightly. Don't people? He said. Well, anyway, that's settled. Unless I can think of something better, I shall tell my sister that I was knocked down by a car which drove on without stopping, and I didn't get its number. And now, perhaps, you'd better leave me. The doctor made a point of quiet and repose. Moreover, I want to go on with this story. The villain has just dropped a cobra down the heroine's chimney, and I must be at her side. It's impossible not to be thrilled by Edgar Wallace. I'll ring if I want anything. I headed for the sitting-room. I found Jeeves there, staring at the portrait in rather a marked manner, as if it hurt him. Jeeves, I said, Mr. Pym appears to be a fixture. Yes, sir. For the nonce, at any rate. And tomorrow we shall have his sister, Mrs. Slingsby, of Slingsby's superb soups, in our midst. Yes, sir. I telegraphed to Mrs. Slingsby shortly before 4. Assuming her to have been at her hotel in Paris at the moment of the telegram's delivery, she will no doubt take a boat early tomorrow afternoon, reaching Dover, or should she prefer the alternative route Folkestone, in time to begin the railway journey at an hour which will enable her to arrive in London at about 7. She will possibly proceed first to her London residence. Yes, Jeeves, I said, yes, a gripping story full of action and human interest. You must have it set to music sometime and sing it. Meanwhile, get this into your head. It's imperative that Mrs. Slingsby does not learn that it was Miss Pendlebury who broke her brother in 2 places. I shall require you, therefore, to approach Mr. Pym before she arrives, ascertain what tale he intends to tell, and be prepared to back it up in every particular. Very good, sir. And now, Jeeves, what of Miss Pendlebury? Sir, she's sure to call to make inquiries. Yes, sir. Well, she mustn't find me here. You know all about women, Jeeves. Yes, sir. Then tell me this. Am I not right in supposing that if Miss Pendlebury is in a position to go into the sick-room, take a long look at the interesting invalid, and then pop out with the memory of that look fresh in her mind, and get a square sight of me lounging about in sponge-bag trousers, she will draw damaging comparisons? You see what I mean? Look on this picture and on that, the one romantic, the other not, eh? Very true, sir. It's a point which I had intended to bring to your attention. An invalid undoubtedly exercises a powerful appeal to the motherliness which exists in every woman's heart, sir. Invalids seem to stir their deepest feelings. The poet Scott has put the matter neatly in the lines, O woman, in our hours of ease uncertain, coy and hard to please, when pain and anguish rack the brow, I held up a hand. At some other time, Jeeves, I said, I shall be delighted to hear your piece, but just now I'm not in the mood. The position being as I have outlined, I propose to clear out early tomorrow morning and not to reappear until nightfall. I shall take the car and dash down to Brighton for the day. Very good, sir. It is better so, isn't it, Jeeves? Indubitably, sir. I think so, too. The sea breezes will tone up my system, which sadly needs a dollop of toning. I leave you in charge of the old home. Very good, sir. Convey my regrets and sympathy to Miss Pendlebury, and tell her I've been called away on business. Yes, sir. Should the Slingsby require refreshment, feed her in moderation. Very good, sir. And in poisoning Mr. Pym's soup, don't use arsenic, which is readily detected. Go to a good chemist and get something that leaves no traces. I sighed and cocked an eye at the portrait. All this is very wonky, Jeeves. Yes, sir. When that portrait was painted, I was a happy man. Yes, sir. Ah, well, Jeeves. Very true, sir. And we left it at that. It was latish when I got back on the following evening. What with a bit of ozone sniffing, a good dinner, and a nice run home in the moonlight, with the old car going as sweet as a nut, I was feeling in pretty good shape once more. In fact, coming through Purley, I went so far as to sing a trifle. The spirit of the Woosters is a buoyant spirit, and optimism had begun to reign again in the W bosom. The way I looked at it was, I saw I'd been mistaken in assuming that a girl must necessarily love a fellow just because he has a broken leg. At first, no doubt, Gladys Pendlebury would feel strangely drawn to the Pym when she saw him lying there a more or less total loss. But it would not be long before other reflections crept in. She'd ask herself if she were wise in trusting her life's happiness to a man who hadn't enough sense to leap out of the way when he saw a car coming. She would tell herself that if this sort of thing had happened once, who knew that it might not go on happening again and again all down the long years? And she would recoil from a married life which consisted entirely of going to hospitals and taking her husband fruit. She would realize how much better off she'd be teamed up with a fellow like Bertie Wooster, who, whatever his faults, at least walked on the pavement and looked up and down the street before he crossed it. It was in excellent spirits, accordingly, that I put the car in the garage, and it was with a merry tra-la on my lips that I let myself into the flat as Big Ben began to strike 11. I rang the bell, and presently, as if he'd divined my wishes, Jeeves came in with siphon and decanter. "Home again, Jeeves," I said, mixing a spot. "Yes, sir." "What's been happening in my absence? Did Miss Pendlebury call?" "Yes, sir, at about 2 o'clock. And left?" "At about 6, sir." I didn't like this so much. A 4-hour visit struck me as a bit sinister. However, there was nothing to be done about it. "And Mrs. Slingsby?" "She arrived shortly after 8 and left at 10, sir." "Ah, agitated?" "Yes, sir, particularly when she left. She was very desirous of seeing you, sir." "Seeing me?" "Yes, sir. Wanted to thank me brokenly, I suppose, for so courteously allowing her favourite brother a place to have his game legs in, eh?" "Possibly, sir. On the other hand, she alluded to you in terms suggestive of disapprobation, sir." "She... what?" "Feckless idiot was one of the expressions she employed, sir." "Feckless idiot?" "Yes, sir." I couldn't make it out. I simply couldn't see what the woman had based her judgment on. My Aunt Agatha has frequently said that sort of thing about me, but she's known me from a boy. I must look into this, Jeeves. Is Mr. Pym asleep?" "No, sir. He rang the bell a moment ago to inquire if we had not a better brand of cigarette in the flat." "He did he?" "Yes, sir." "The accident doesn't seem to have affected his nerve." "No, sir." I found Lucius Pym sitting propped up among the pillows reading his detective story. "Ah, Wooster," he said. "Welcome home. I say, in case you were worrying, it's all right about that cobra. The hero had got at it without the villain's knowledge and extracted its poison fangs, with the result that when it fell down the chimney and started trying to bite the heroine, its efforts were null and void. I doubt if a cobra has ever felt so silly. Never mind about cobras." "It's no good saying never mind about cobras," said Lucius Pym in a gentle, rebuking sort of voice. "You've jolly well got to mind about cobras if they haven't had their poison fangs extracted. Ask anyone. Oh, by the way, my sister looked in. She wants to have a word with you." "And I want to have a word with her. Two minds with but a single thought. What she wants to talk to you about is this accident of mine. You remember that story I was to tell her, about the car driving on? Well, the understanding was, if you recollect, that I was only to tell it if I couldn't think of something better. Fortunately, I thought of something much better. It came to me in a flash as I lay in bed looking at the ceiling. You see, that driving on story was thin. People don't knock fellows down and break their legs and go driving on. The thing wouldn't have held water for a minute. So I told her you did it. What? I said it was you who did it in your car. Much more likely, makes the whole thing neat and well-rounded. I knew you'd approve. At all costs, we've got to keep it from her that I was outed by Gladys. I made it as easy for you as I could, saying that you were a bit pickled at the time, and so not to be blamed for what you did. Some fellows wouldn't have thought of that. Still, said Lucius Pym with a sigh, I'm afraid she's not any too pleased with you. She isn't she? No, she's not. And I strongly recommend to you, if you want anything like a pleasant interview tomorrow, to sweeten her a bit overnight. How do you mean, sweeten her? I'd suggest you send her some flowers. It would be a graceful gesture. Roses are her favourites. Shoot her in a few roses. Number 3 Hill Street is the address, and it may make all the difference. I think it's my duty to inform you, old man, that my sister Beatrice is rather a tough egg when roused. My brother-in-law is due back from New York at any moment, and the danger, as I see it, is that Beatrice, unless sweetened, will get at him and make him bring actions against you for torts and malfeasances and what-not, and get thumping damages. He isn't over fond of me, and left to himself would rather approve than otherwise of people who broke my legs. But he's crazy about Beatrice, and will do anything she asks him to. So my advice is, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, and bung them into number 3 Hill Street. Otherwise, the case of Slingsby versus Wooster will be on the calendar before you can say, what ho? I gave the fellow a look. Lost on him, of course. It's a pity you didn't think of that before, I said. And it wasn't so much the actual words, if you know what I mean, as the way I said it. I thought of it all right, said Lucius Pym, but as we were both agreed that at all costs— Oh, all right, I said, all right, all right. You aren't annoyed, said Lucius Pym, looking at me with a touch of surprise. Oh, no. Splendid, said Lucius Pym, relieved. I knew you'd feel that I'd done the only possible thing. It would have been awful if Beatrice had found out about Gladys. I dare say you've noticed, Wooster, that when women find themselves in a position to take a running kick at one of their own sex, they're twice as rough on her as they would be on a man. Now, you being of the male persuasion will find everything made nice and smooth for you. A quart of assorted roses, a few smiles, a tactful word or two, and she'll have melted before you know where you are. Play your cards properly, and you and Beatrice will be laughing merrily and having a game of round and round the mulberry bush together in about 5 minutes. Better not let Slingsby's soups catch you at it, however. He's very jealous where Beatrice is concerned. And now, you'll forgive me, old chap, if I send you away. The doctor says I ought not to talk too much for a day or two. Besides, it's time for bye-bye. The more I thought it over, the better that idea of sending those roses looked. Lucius Pym was not a man I was fond of. In fact, if I had had to choose between him and a cockroach as a companion for a walking tour, the cockroach would have had it by a short head. But there was no doubt that he'd outlined the right policy. His advice was good, and I decided to follow it. Rising next morning at 10:15, I swallowed a strengthening breakfast and legged it off to that flower shop in Piccadilly. I couldn't leave the thing to Jeeves. It was essentially a mission that demanded the personal touch. I laid out a couple of quid on a sizable bouquet, sent it with my card to Hill Street, and then looked in at the drones for a brief refresher. It's a thing I don't often do in the morning, but this threatened to be rather a special morning. It was about noon when I got back to the flat. I went into the sitting room and tried to adjust the mind to the coming interview. It had to be faced, of course, but it wasn't any good my telling myself that it was going to be one of those jolly scenes the memory of which cheer you up as you sit toasting your toes at the fire in your old age. I stood or fell by the roses. If they sweetened the Slingsby, all would be well. If they failed to sweeten her, Bertram was undoubtedly for it. The clock ticked on, but she didn't come. A late riser, I took it, and was slightly encouraged by the reflection. My experience of women has been that the earlier they leave the hay, the more vicious specimens they are apt to be. My Aunt Agatha, for instance, is always up with the lark, and look at her. Still, you couldn't be sure that this rule always worked, and after a while the suspense began to get in amongst me a bit. To divert the mind, I fetched the old putter out of its bag and began to practice putts into a glass. After all, even if the Slingsby turned out to be all that I'd pictured her in my gloomier moments, I should have improved my close-to-the-hole work on the green and be that much up, at any rate. It was while I was shaping for a rather tricky shot that the front doorbell went. I picked up the glass and shoved the putter behind the settee. It struck me that if the woman found me engaged on what you might call a frivolous pursuit, she might take it to indicate lack of remorse and proper feeling. I straightened the collar, pulled down the waistcoat, and managed to fasten on the face of a sort of sad half-smile, which was welcoming without being actually jovial. It looked all right in the mirror, and I held it as the door opened. "Mr. Slingsby," announced Jeeves. And having spoken these words, he closed the door and left us alone together. For quite a time there wasn't anything in the way of chit-chat. The shock of expecting Mrs. Slingsby and finding myself confronted by something entirely different, in fact not the same thing at all, seemed to have affected the vocal cords, and the visitor didn't appear to be disposed to make light conversation himself. He stood there looking strong and silent. I suppose you have to be like that if you want to manufacture anything in the nature of a really convincing soup. Slingsby's superb soups was a Roman emperor-looking sort of bird with keen, penetrating eyes and one of those jutting chins. The eyes seemed to be fixed on me in a dashed, unpleasant stare, and, unless I was mistaken, he was grinding his teeth a trifle. For some reason, he appeared to have taken a strong dislike to me at sight, and I'm bound to say this rather puzzled me. I don't pretend to have one of those fascinating personalities which you get from studying the booklets advertised in the back pages of the magazines, but I couldn't recall another case in the whole of my career where a single glimpse of the old map had been enough to make anyone look as if he wanted to foam at the mouth. Usually when people meet me for the first time, they don't seem to know I'm there. However, I exerted myself to play the host. "Mr. Slingsby? That's my name. Just got back from America. I landed this morning. Sooner than you were expected, what? So I imagine. Very glad to see you. You won't be for long." I took time off to do a bit of gulping. I saw now what had happened. This bloke had been home, seen his wife, heard the story of the accident, and had hastened round to the flat to slip it across me. Evidently those roses hadn't sweetened the female of the species. The only thing to do now seemed to be to take a stab at sweetening the male. "Have a drink," I said. "No." "A cigarette?" "No." "A chair?" "No." I went into the silence once more. These non-drinking, non-smoking, non-sitters are hard birds to handle. "Don't grin at me, sir." I shot a glance at myself in the mirror and saw what he meant. The sad half-smile had slopped over a bit. I adjusted it, and there was another pause. "Now, sir," said the superb super, "to business. I think I need scarcely tell you why I'm here." No, of course, absolutely. It's about that little matter." He gave a snort which nearly upset a vase on the mantelpiece. "Little matter? So you consider it a little matter, do you?" "Well, let me tell you, sir, that when I find that during my absence from the country a man has been annoying my wife with his importunities, I regard it as anything but a little matter, and I shall endeavour," said the super, the eyes gleaming a trifle brighter as he rubbed his hands together in a hideous, menacing way, "to make you see the thing in the same light." I couldn't make head or tail of this. I simply couldn't follow him. The lemon began to swim. "Eh?" I said. "Your wife?" "You heard me." "There must be some mistake." "There is. You made it." "But I don't know your wife." "Ha! I've never even met her." "Tcha! Honestly, I haven't." "Bah!" He drank me in for a moment. "Do you deny you sent her flowers?" I felt the heart turn a double somersault. I began to catch his drift. "Flowers," he proceeded. "Roses, sir, great fat beastly roses, enough of them to sink a ship. Your card was attached to them by a small..." His voice died away in a sort of gurgle, and I saw that he was staring at something behind me. I spun round, and there in the doorway, I hadn't seen it open because during the last spasm of dialogue I'd been backing cautiously towards it, there in the doorway stood a female. One glance was enough to tell me who she was. No woman could look so like Lucius Pym who hadn't the misfortune to be related to him. It was Sister Beatrice, the tough egg. I saw all. She'd left home before the flowers had arrived. She had sneaked, unsweetened, into the flat, while I was fortifying the system at the drones, and here she was. I said. "Alexander," said the female. "Coo," said the super, or it may have been coo. Whatever it was in the nature of a battle cry or slogan of war. The super's worst suspicions had obviously been confirmed. His eyes shone with a strange light. His chin pushed itself out another couple of inches. He clenched and unclenched his fingers once or twice as if to make sure that they were working properly and could be relied on to do a good, clean job of strangling. Then, once more observing "goo" or "goo," he sprang forward, trod on the golf ball I had been practicing putting with, and took one of the finest tosses I have ever witnessed. The perler of a lifetime. For a moment the air seemed to be full of arms and legs, and then, with a thud that nearly dislocated the flat, he made a forced landing against the wall. And feeling I had had about all I wanted, I oiled from the room, and was in the act of grabbing my hat from the rack in the hall when Jeeves appeared. "I fancied I heard a noise, sir." "Quite possibly," I said. "It was Mr. Slingsby." "Sir?" "Mr. Slingsby, practicing Russian dances," I explained. "I rather think he's fractured an assortment of limbs. Better go in and see." "Very good, sir." "If he's the wreck I imagine, put him in my room and send for the doctor. The flat is filling up nicely with the various units of the Pym family and its connections, eh, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir." "I think the supply is about exhausted, but should any aunts or uncles by marriage come along and break their limbs, bed them out on the Chesterfield." "Very good, sir." "I personally, Jeeves," I said, opening the front door and pausing on the threshold, "am off to Paris. I will wire you the address. Notify me in due course when the place is free from Pyms and completely purged of Slingsbys, and I will return. Oh, and Jeeves?" "Sir?" "Spare no effort to mollify these birds. They think, at least Slingsby female thinks, and what she thinks today he will think tomorrow, that it was I who ran over Mr. Pym in my car. Endeavour during my absence to sweeten them." "Very good, sir." "And now perhaps you'd better be going in and viewing the body. I shall proceed to the drones, where I shall lunch, subsequently catching the 2 o'clock train at Charing Cross. Meet me there with an assortment of luggage." It was a matter of 3 weeks or so before Jeeves sent me the all-clear signal. I spent the time pottering pretty perturbedly about Paris and environs. It's a city I'm fairly fond of, but I was glad to be able to return to the old home. I hopped onto a passing aeroplane, and a couple of hours later was bowling through Croydon on my way to the centre of things. It was somewhere down in the Sloane Square neighbourhood that I first caught sight of the poster. A traffic block had occurred, and I was glancing idly this way and that, when suddenly my eye was caught by something that looked familiar. And then I saw what it was. Pasted on a blank wall, and measuring about 100 feet each way, was an enormous poster, mostly red and blue. At the top of it were the words, "Slingsby's Superb Soups," and at the bottom, "Succulent and Strengthening." And in between, me. Yes, dash it, Bertram Wooster in person, a reproduction of the Pendlebury portrait, perfect in every detail. It was the sort of thing to make a fellow's eyes flicker, and mine flickered. You might say a mist seemed to roll before them. Then it lifted, and I was able to get a good long look before the traffic moved on. Of all the absolutely foul sights I've ever seen, this took the biscuit with ridiculous ease. The thing was a bally libel on the Wooster face, and yet it was as unmistakable as if it had had my name under it. I saw now what Jeeves had meant when he said that the portrait had given me a hungry look. In the poster, this look had become one of bestial greed. There I sat, absolutely slavering through a monocle about 6 inches in circumference, at a plateful of soup, looking as if I hadn't had a meal for weeks. The whole thing seemed to take one straight away into a different and a dreadful world. I woke up from a species of trance or coma to find myself at the door of the block of flats. To buzz upstairs and charge into the home was with me the work of a moment. Jeeves came shimmering down the hall, the respectful beam of welcome on his face. "I'm glad to see you back, sir." "Never mind about that," I yipped. "What about—" "The posters, sir. I was wondering if you might have observed them." "I observed them." "Striking, sir. Very striking. Now, perhaps you'll kindly explain. You instructed me, if you recollect, sir, to spare no effort to mollify Mr. Slingsby." "Yes, but—" "It proved a somewhat difficult task, sir. For some time Mr. Slingsby, on the advice and owing to the persuasion of Mrs. Slingsby, appeared to be resolved to institute an action in law against you, a procedure which I knew you would find most distasteful." "Yes, but—" "And then, the first day he was able to leave his bed, he observed the portrait, and it seemed to me judicious to point out to him its possibilities as an advertising medium. He readily fell in with the suggestion, and on my assurance that should he abandon the projected action in law, you would willingly permit the use of the portrait, he entered into negotiations with Miss Pendlebury for the purchase of the copyright." "Oh. Well, I hope she's got something out of it at any rate." "Yes, sir. Mr. Pym, acting as Miss Pendlebury's agent, drove, I understand, an extremely satisfactory bargain." "He acted as her agent, eh?" "Yes, sir. In his capacity as fiancé to the young lady, sir." "Fiancé?" "Yes, sir." It shows how the sight of that poster had got into my ribs when I state that instead of being laid out cold by this announcement, I merely said, "Ha!" or "Ho!" or it may have been, "Hmm." After the poster, nothing seemed to matter. "After that poster, Jeeves," I said, "nothing seems to matter." "No, sir." "No, Jeeves. A woman has tossed my heart lightly away, but what of it?" "Exactly, sir. The voice of love seemed to call to me, but it was a wrong number." "Is that going to crush me?" "No, sir. No, Jeeves, it is not. But what does matter is this ghastly business of my face being spread from end to end of the metropolis with the eyes fixed on a plate of Slingsby's superb soup. I must leave London. The lads at the drones will kid me without ceasing." "Yes, sir. And Mrs. Spencer Gregson." I paled visibly. I hadn't thought of Aunt Agatha and what she might have to say about letting down the family prestige. "You don't mean to say she's been ringing up?" "Several times daily, sir." "Jeeves, flight is the only resource." "Yes, sir." "Back to Paris, what?" "I should not recommend the move, sir. The posters are, I understand, shortly to appear in that city also, advertising the bouillon suprême. Mr. Slingsby's products command a large sale in France. The sight would be painful for you, sir." "Then where?" "If I might make a suggestion, sir, why not adhere to your original intention of cruising in Mrs. Travers' yacht in the Mediterranean? On the yacht you would be free from the annoyance of these advertising displays." The man seemed to me to be drivelling. "But the yacht started weeks ago. It may be anywhere by now." "No, sir. The cruise was postponed for a month owing to the illness of Mr. Travers's chef, Anatole, who contracted influenza. Mr. Travers refused to sail without him." "You mean they haven't started?" "Not yet, sir. The yacht sails from Southampton on Tuesday next." "Why then, dash it, nothing could be sweeter." "No, sir." "Ring up Aunt Dahlia and tell her we'll be there." "I ventured to take the liberty of doing so a few moments before you arrived, sir." "You did?" "Yes, sir. I thought it probable that the plan would meet with your approval." "It does. I've wished all along I was going on that cruise." "I too, sir. It should be extremely pleasant. The tang of the salt breezes, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "The moonlight on the water." "Precisely, sir." "The gentle heaving of the waves." "Exactly, sir." I felt absolutely in the pink. Gladys? Bah! The posters? Bah! That was the way I looked at it. "Yo-ho-ho, Jeeves," I said, giving the trousers a bit of a hitch. "Yes, sir. In fact, I will go further. Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum." "Very good, sir. I will bring it immediately."
This ends The Spot of Art. Jeeves and the Kid Clementina.
It's been well said of Bertram Wooster by those who know him best that whatever other sporting functions he may see fit to oil out of, you will always find him battling to his 16 handicap at the annual golf tournament of the Drones Club. Nevertheless, when I heard that this year they were holding it at Bingley-on-Sea, I confess I hesitated. As I stood gazing out of the window of my suite at the Splendide on the morning of the opening day, I was not exactly a twitter, if you understand me, but I couldn't help feeling I might have been rather rash. "Jeeves," I said, "now that we've actually arrived, I find myself wondering if it was quite prudent to come here." "It is a pleasant spot, sir." "Where every prospect pleases," I agreed. "But though the spicy breezes blow fair o'er Bingley-on-Sea, we must never forget that this is where my Aunt Agatha's old friend Miss Mapleton runs a girls' school. If the relative knew I was here, she would expect me to call on Miss Mapleton." "Very true, sir." I shivered somewhat. "I met her once, Jeeves. 'Twas on a summer's evening in my tent, the day I overcame the nervee. Or rather at lunch at Aunt Agatha's a year ago come Lammas Eve. It's not an experience I would willingly undergo again." "Indeed, sir." "Besides, you remember what happened last time I got into a girls' school?" "Yes, sir." "Secrecy and silence, then. My visit here must be strictly incog. If Aunt Agatha happens to ask you where I spent this week, tell her I went to Harrogate for the cure." "Very good, sir. Pardon me, sir, are you proposing to appear in those garments in public?" Up to this point our conversation had been friendly and cordial, but I now perceived that the jarring note had been struck. I'd been wondering when my new +4s would come under discussion, and I was prepared to battle for them like a tigress for her young. "Certainly, Jeeves," I said. "Why? Don't you like them?" "No, sir." "You think them on the bright side?" "Yes, sir." "A little vivid, they strike you as?" "Yes, sir." "Well, I think highly of them, Jeeves," I said firmly. There already being a certain amount of chilliness in the air, it seemed to me a suitable moment for springing another item of information which I'd been keeping from him for some time. Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" "I ran into Miss Wickham the other day. After chatting of this and that, she invited me to join a party she's getting up to go to Antibes this summer." "Indeed, sir." He now looked definitely squiggle-eyed. Jeeves, as I think I've mentioned before, doesn't approve of Bobby Wickham. There was what you might call a tense silence. I braced myself for an exhibition of the good old Wooster determination. I mean to say, one has got to take a firm stand from time to time. The trouble with Jeeves is that he tends occasionally to get above himself. Just because he's surged round, and I admit it freely, done the young master a bit of good in one or two crises, he has a nasty way of conveying the impression that he looks on Bertram Wooster as a sort of idiot child, who, but for him, would conk in the first chucker. I resent this. "I have accepted, Jeeves," I said in a quiet, level voice, lighting a cigarette with a careless flick of the wrist. "Indeed, sir." "You like Antibes?" "Yes, sir." "So shall I." "Yes, sir." "That's settled, then?" "Yes, sir." I was pleased. The firm stand I saw had done its work. It was plain that the man was crushed beneath the iron heel. Cowed, if you know what I mean. "Right-ho, then, Jeeves." "Very good, sir." I hadn't expected to return from the arena until well on in the evening, but circumstances so arranged themselves that it was barely 3 o'clock when I found myself back again. I was wandering moodily to and fro on the pier when I observed Jeeves shimmering towards me. "Good afternoon, sir," he said. "I hadn't supposed that you would be returning quite so soon, or I would have remained at the hotel." "I hadn't supposed that I would be returning quite so soon myself, Jeeves," I said, sighing somewhat. "I was outed in the first round, I regret to say." "Indeed, sir, I'm sorry to hear that." "And to increase the mortification of defeat, Jeeves, by a blighter who hadn't spared himself at the luncheon table, and was quite noticeably sozzled. I couldn't seem to do anything right." "Possibly you omitted to keep your eye on the ball with sufficient assiduity, sir." Well, something of that nature, no doubt. Anyway, here I am, a game and popular loser, and I paused and scanned the horizon with some interest. Great Scott, Jeeves, look at that girl just coming onto the pier. I never saw anybody so extraordinarily like Miss Wickham. How do you account for these resemblances?
In the present instance, sir, I attribute the similarity to the fact that the young lady is Miss Wickham.
Eh?
Yes, sir. If you notice, she's waving to you now.
But what on earth is she doing down here?
I am unable to say, sir.
His voice was chilly and seemed to suggest that whatever had brought Bobby Wickham to Bingley-on-Sea, it couldn't, in his opinion, be anything good. He dropped back into the offing, registering alarm and despondency, and I removed the old Homburg and waggled it genially. "What-ho?" I said. Bobby came to anchor alongside. "Hello, Bertie," she said. "I didn't know you were here." "I am," I assured her. "In mourning?" she asked, eyeing the trouserings. "Rather natty, aren't they?" I said, following her gaze. "Jeeves doesn't like them, but then he's notoriously hidebound in the matter of legwear. What are you doing in Bingley?" "My cousin Clementina is at school here. It's her birthday, and I thought I'd come down and see her. I'm just off there now. Are you staying here tonight?" "Yes, at the Splendide. You can give me dinner there if you like." Jeeves was behind me, and I couldn't see him, but at these words I felt his eye slap warningly against the back of my neck. I knew what it was that he was trying to broadcast, viz. That it would be tempting Providence to mix with Bobby Wickham, even to the extent of giving her a bite to eat. Dashed absurd was my verdict. Get entangled with young Bobby in the intricate life of a country house where almost anything can happen, and I'm not saying but how any doom or disaster could lurk behind the simple pronging of a spot of dinner together, I fail to see. I ignored the man. "Of course, certainly, rather, absolutely," I said. "That'll be fine. I've got to get back to London tonight for revelry of sorts at the Berkeley, but it doesn't matter if I'm a bit late. We'll turn up at about 7:30, and you can take us to the movies afterwards." "We? Us? Clementina and me?" "You don't mean you intend to bring your ghastly cousin?" "Of course I do. Don't you want the child to have a little pleasure on her birthday? And she isn't ghastly, she's a dear. She won't be any trouble. All you'll have to do is to take her back to the school afterwards. You can manage that without straining us in you, can't you?" I eyed her keenly. "What does it involve?" "How do you mean, what does it involve?" "The last time I was lured into a girls' school, a headmistress with an eye like a gimlet insisted on my addressing the chain gang on ideals and the life to come. This will not happen again tonight." "Of course not. You just go to the front door, ring the bell, and bung her in." I mused. "That would appear to be well within our scope, eh, Jeeves?"
"I should be disposed to imagine so, sir."
The man's tone was cold and soupy, and scanning his face I observed on it an "if you would only be guided by me" expression, which annoyed me intensely. There are moments when Jeeves looks just like an aunt. "Right," I said, ignoring him once more, and rather pointedly at that. "Then I'll expect you at 7:30. Don't be late. And see," I added, just to show the girl that beneath the smiling exterior I was a man of iron, "that the kid has her hands washed and does not sniff." I hadn't, I confess, looked forward with any great keenness to hobnobbing with Bobby Wickham's cousin Clementina, but I'm bound to admit that she might have been considerably worse. Small girls, as a rule, I've noticed, are inclined when confronted with me to giggle a good deal. They snigger and stare. I look up and find their eyes glued on me in an incredulous manner, as if they were reluctant to believe that I was really true. I suspect them of being in the process of memorizing any little peculiarities of deportment that I may possess, in order to reproduce them later for the entertainment of their fellow inmates. With the kid Clementina there was nothing of this description. She was a quiet, saint-like child of about 13, in fact, seeing that this was her birthday, exactly 13, and her gaze revealed only silent admiration. Her hands were spotless. She hadn't a cold in the head, and at dinner, during which her behaviour was unexceptionable, she proved a sympathetic listener, hanging on my lips, so to speak, when with the aid of a fork and 2 peas I explained to her how my opponent that afternoon had stymied me on the 10th. She was equally above criticism at the movies, and at the conclusion of the proceedings thanked me for the treat with visible emotion. I was pleased with the child, and said as much to Bobby while assisting her into the two-seater. "Yes, I told you she was a dear," said Bobby, treading on the self-starter in preparation for the dash to London. "I always insist that they misjudge her at that school. They're always misjudging people. They misjudged me when I was there." "Misjudge her? How?" "Oh, in various ways, but then what can you expect of a dump like St. Monica's?" I started. "St. Monica's? That's the name of the place." "You don't mean the kid is at Miss Mapleton's school? Why shouldn't she be?" "But Miss Mapleton is my Aunt Agatha's oldest friend." "I know. It was your Aunt Agatha who got Mother to send me there when I was a kid." "I say," I said earnestly, "when you were there this afternoon, you didn't mention having met me down here." "No?" "That's all right." I was relieved. "You see, if Miss Mapleton knew I was in Bingley, she would expect me to call. I shall be leaving tomorrow morning, so all will be well. But dash it," I said, spotting the snag, "how about tonight?" "What about tonight?" "Well, shan't I have to see her? I can't just ring the front doorbell, sling the kid in, and leg it. I should never hear the last of it from Aunt Agatha." Bobby looked at me in an odd, meditative sort of way. "As a matter of fact, Bertie," she said, "I'd been meaning to touch on that point. I think if I were you, I wouldn't ring the front doorbell." "Eh? Why not?" "Well, it's like this, you see. Clementina is supposed to be in bed. They sent her there just as I was leaving this afternoon. Think of it, on her birthday, right plumb spang in the middle of her birthday, and all for putting sherbet in the ink to make it fizz." I reeled. "You aren't telling me that this foul kid came out without leave?" "Yes, I am. That's exactly it. She got up and sneaked out when nobody was looking. She'd set her heart on getting a square meal. I suppose I really ought to have told you right at the start, but I didn't want to spoil your evening." As a general rule, in my dealings with the delicately nurtured, I am the soul of knightly chivalry, suave, genial, and polished. But I can on occasion say the bitter, cutting thing, and I said it now. "Oh," I said. "But it's all right." "Yes," I said, speaking, if I recollect, between my clenched teeth. "Nothing could be sweeter, could it? The situation is one which it would be impossible to view with concern. What? I shall turn up with the kid, get looked at through steel-rimmed spectacles by the Mapleton, and after an agreeable 5 minutes shall back out, leaving the Mapleton to go to her escritoire and write a full account of the proceedings to my Aunt Agatha. And contemplating what will happen after that, the imagination totters. I confidently expect my Aunt Agatha to beat all previous records." The girl clicked her tongue chidingly. "Oh, don't make such heavy weather, Bertie. You must learn not to fuss so." "I must I? Everything's going to be all right. I'm not saying it won't be necessary to exercise a little strategy in getting Clem into the house, but it'll be perfectly simple, if you'll only listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. First, you'll need a good long piece of string." "String? String. Surely even you know what string is." I stiffened rather haughtily. "Certainly," I replied. "You mean string." "That's right, string. You take this with you, and soften the Mapleton's heart by doing tricks with it, I suppose. Bitter, I know, but I was deeply stirred. You take this string with you," proceeded Bobby patiently, "and when you get into the garden you go through it till you come to a conservatory near the house. Inside it you'll find a lot of flower pots. How are you on recognizing a flower pot when you see one, Bertie?" "I'm thoroughly familiar with flower pots, if, as I suppose, you mean those sort of pot things they put flowers in." "That's exactly what I do mean. All right, then, grab an armful of these flower pots and go round the conservatory till you come to a tree. Climb this, tie a string to one of the pots, balance it on a handy branch which you'll find overhangs the conservatory, and then, having stationed Clem near the front door, retire into the middle distance and jerk the string. The flower pot will fall and smash the glass. Someone in the house will hear the noise and come out to investigate, and while the door is open and nobody near, Clem will sneak in and go up to bed. But suppose no one comes out. Then you repeat the process with another pot. It seemed sound enough. You're sure it'll work? It's never failed yet. That's the way I always used to get in after lock-up when I was at St. Monica's. Now, you're sure you've got it clear, Bertie? Let's have a quick run-through to make certain, and then I really must be off. String? String. Conservatory or greenhouse? Flower pot? Flower pot. Tree, climb, branch, climb down, jerk, smash, and then off to Betty-Bye. Got it? I've got it, but, I said sternly, let me tell you just one thing. I haven't time, I must rush. Write to me about it, using one side of the paper only. Goodbye. She rolled off, and after following her with burning eyes for a moment, I returned to Jeeves, who was in the background, showing the kid Clementina how to make a rabbit with a pocket handkerchief. I drew him aside. I was feeling a little better now, for I perceived that an admirable opportunity had presented itself for putting the man in his place and correcting his view that he's the only member of our establishment with brains and resource. "Jeeves," I said, "you will doubtless be surprised to learn that something in the nature of a hitch has occurred." "Not at all, sir." "No?" "No, sir. In matters where Miss Wickham is involved, I am, if I may take the liberty of saying so, always on the alert for hitches. If you recollect, sir, I have frequently observed that Miss Wickham, while a charming young lady, is apt—" Yes, Jeeves, I know." "What would the precise nature of the trouble be this time, sir?" I explained the circs. "The kid is AWOL. They sent her to bed for putting sherbet in the ink, and in bed they imagined her to have spent the evening, instead of which she was out with me, wolfing the 8-course table d'hôte dinner at 7 and 6, and then going on to the Marine Plaza to enjoy an entertainment on the silver screen. It's our task to get her back into the house without anyone knowing. I may mention, Jeeves, that the school in which this young excrescence is serving her sentence is the one run by my Aunt Agatha's old friend, Miss Mapleton." "Indeed, sir." "A problem, Jeeves, what?" "Yes, sir. In fact, one might say a pretty problem." "Undoubtedly, sir. If I might suggest—" I was expecting this. I raised a hand. "I do not require any suggestions, Jeeves. I can handle this matter myself." "I was merely about to propose—" I raised the hand again. "Peace, Jeeves. I have the situation well under control. I've had one of my ideas. It may interest you to hear how my brain worked. It occurred to me, thinking the thing over, that a house like St. Monica's would be likely to have near it a conservatory containing flower pots. Then, like a flash, the whole thing came to me. I proposed to procure some string, to tie it to a flower pot, to balance the pot on a branch — there will no doubt be a tree near the conservatory with a branch overhanging it — and to retire to a distance holding the string. You'll station yourself with the kid near the front door, taking care to keep carefully concealed. I shall then jerk the string, the pot will smash the glass, the noise will bring someone out, and while the front door is open, you will shoot the kid in and leave the rest to her personal judgment. Your share in the proceedings, you'll notice, is simplicity itself, mere routine work, and shouldn't tax you unduly. How about it?" "Well, sir." "Jeeves, I've had occasion before to comment on this habit of yours of saying 'well, sir' whenever I suggest anything in the nature of a ruse or piece of strategy. I dislike it more every time you do it, but I shall be glad to hear what possible criticism you can find to make." "I was merely about to express the opinion, sir, that the plan seems a trifle elaborate." "In a place as tight as this, you've got to be elaborate." "Not necessarily, sir. The alternative scheme which I was about to propose—" I shushed the man. "There will be no need for alternative schemes, Jeeves. We will carry on along the lines I've indicated. I'll give you 10 minutes' start. That'll enable you to take up your position near the front door and self to collect the string. At the conclusion of that period, I'll come along and do all the difficult part. So no more discussion. Snap into it, Jeeves." "Very good, sir." I felt pretty bucked as I tooled up the hill to St. Monica's, and equally bucked as I pushed open the front gate and stepped into the dark garden. But just as I started to cross the lawn, there suddenly came upon me a rummy sensation as if all my bones had been removed and spaghetti substituted, and I paused. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of starting off on a binge filled with a sort of glow of exhilaration, if that's the word I want, and then, without a moment's warning, having it disappear as if somebody had pressed a switch. That's what happened to me at this juncture, and a most unpleasant feeling it was. Rather like when you take one of those express elevators in New York at the top of the building and discover on reaching the 27th floor that you've carelessly left all your insides up on the 32nd, and it's too late now to stop and fetch them back. The truth came to me like a bit of ice down the neck. I perceived that I'd been a dashed sight too impulsive. Purely in order to score off Jeeves, I'd gone and let myself in for what promised to be the mouldiest ordeal of a lifetime. And the nearer I got to the house, the more I wished that I'd been a little bit less haughty with the man when he'd tried to outline that alternative scheme of his. An alternative scheme was just what I felt I could have done with, and the more alternative it was, the better I would have liked it. At this point I found myself at the conservatory door, and a few moments later I was inside, scooping up the pots. Then, ho for the tree, bearing mid snow and ice the banner with the strange device Excelsior. I'll say for that tree that it might have been placed there for the purpose. My views on the broad general principle of leaping from branch to branch in a garden belonging to Aunt Agatha's closest friend remained unaltered, but I had to admit that if it was to be done, this was undoubtedly the tree to do it on. It was a cedar of sorts, and almost before I knew where I was sitting on top of the world with the conservatory roof gleaming below me. I balanced the flower pot on my knee and began to tie the string round it. And as I tied, my thoughts turned in a moody sort of way to the subject of woman. I was suffering from a considerable strain of the old nerves at the moment, of course, and looking back it may be that I was too harsh, but the way I felt in that dark roosting hour was that you can say what you like, but the more a thoughtful man has to do with women, the more extraordinary it seems to him that such a sex should be allowed to clutter up the earth. Women, the way I looked at it, simply wouldn't do. Take the females who are mixed up in this present business. Aunt Agatha, to start with, better known as the pest of Pont Street, the human-snapping turtle. Aunt Agatha's closest friend, Miss Mapleton, of whom I can only say that on the single occasion on which I'd met her she'd struck me as just the sort of person who would be Aunt Agatha's closest friend. Bobby Wickham, a girl who went about the place letting the pure in heart in for the sort of thing I was doing now, and Bobby Wickham's cousin Clementina, who instead of sticking sedulously to her studies and learning to be a good wife and mother, spent the springtime of her life filling ink pots with sherbet. What a crew! What a crew! I mean to say, what a crew! I just worked myself up into rather an impressive state of moral indignation, and was preparing to go even further, when a sudden bright light shone upon me from below, and a voice spoke. "Whoa!" it said. It was a policeman. Apart from the fact of his having a lantern, I knew it was a policeman because he had said, "Ho!" I don't know if you recollect my telling you of the time I broke into Bingo Little's house to pinch the dictaphone record of the mushy article his wife had written about him and sailed out of the study window right into the arms of the force. On that occasion the guardian of the law had said "ho" and kept on saying it. So evidently policemen are taught this as part of their training. And after all, it's not a bad way of opening conversation in the sort of cirques in which they generally have to chat with people. "You come down out of that," he said. I came on down. I just got the flower pot balanced on its branch, and I left it there feeling rather as if I'd touched off the time fuse of a bomb. Much seemed to me to depend on its stability and poise, as it were. If it continued to balance, an easy nonchalance might still get me out of this delicate position. If it fell, I saw things being a bit hard to explain. In fact, even as it was, I couldn't see my way to any explanation which would be really convincing. However, I had a stab at it. "Ah, officer," I said. It sounded a bit weak. I said it again, this time with the emphasis on the "ah." It sounded weaker than ever. I saw that Bertram would have to do better than this. "It's all right, officer," I said. All right, is it? Oh, yes, oh, yes. What are you doing up there?
Me, officer?
Yes, you.
Nothing, Sergeant.
Oh. We eased into the silence, but it wasn't one of those restful silences that occur in talks between old friends. Embarrassing. Awkward. You'd better come along with me, said the gendarme. The last time I had heard those words from a similar source had been in Leicester Square one boat race night when, on my advice, my old pal Oliver Randolph Sipperley had endeavoured to steal a policeman's helmet at a moment when the policeman was inside it. On that occasion they'd been addressed to young Sippy, and they hadn't sounded any too good even so. Addressed to me, they more or less froze the marrow. "No, I say, dash it," I said. And it was at this crisis, when Bertram had frankly shot his bolt, and could only have been described as nonplussed, that a soft step sounded beside us, and a soft voice broke the silence. "Have you got them, officer?" "No. I see, it is Mr. Wooster." The policeman switched the lantern round. "Who are you?" "I am Mr. Wooster's gentleman's personal gentleman." "Whose?"
"Mr. Wooster's."
"Is this man's name Wooster?"
"This gentleman's name is Mr. Wooster. I am in his employment as gentleman's personal gentleman."
I think the cop was awed by the man's majesty of demeanour, but he came back strongly. "Oh," he said, "not in Miss Mapleton's employment?"
"Miss Mapleton does not employ a gentleman's personal gentleman."
"Then what are you doing in her garden?"
"I was in conference with Miss Mapleton inside her house, and she desired me to step out and ascertain whether Mr. Wooster had been successful in apprehending the intruders."
"What intruders?"
"The suspicious characters whom Mr. Wooster and I had observed passing through the garden as we entered it."
"And what were you doing entering it?"
Mr. Wooster had come to pay a call on Miss Mapleton, who is a close friend of his family. We noticed suspicious characters crossing the lawn. On perceiving these suspicious characters, Mr. Wooster dispatched me to warn and reassure Miss Mapleton, he himself remaining to investigate."
"I found him up a tree."
"If Mr. Wooster was up a tree, I have no doubt he was actuated by excellent motives and had only Miss Mapleton's best interests at heart."
The policeman brooded. "Oh," he said. "Well, if you want to know, I don't believe a word of it. We had a telephone call at the station saying there was somebody in Miss Mapleton's garden, and I found this fellow up a tree. It's my belief you're both in this, and I'm going to take you in to the lady for identification."
Jeeves inclined his head gracefully. "I shall be delighted to accompany you, officer, if such is your wish, and I feel sure that in this connection I may speak for Mr. Wooster also. He too, I am confident, will interpose no obstacle in the way of your plans. If you consider that circumstances have placed Mr. Wooster in a position that may be termed equivocal or even compromising, it will naturally be his wish to exculpate himself at the earliest possible—"
"Here," said the policeman, slightly rattled.
"Officer?"
"Less of it."
"Just as you say, officer."
"Switch it off, and come along."
"Very good, officer."
I must say that I've enjoyed functions more than that walk to the front door. It seemed to me that doom had come upon me, so to speak, and I thought it hard that a gallant effort like Jeeves's, well-reasoned and nicely planned, should have failed to click. Even to me his story had rung almost true in spots, and it was a great blow that the man behind the lantern hadn't sucked it in without a question. There's no doubt about it, being a policeman warps a man's mind and ruins that sunny faith in his fellow human beings which is the foundation of a lovable character. There seems no way of avoiding this. I could see no gleam of light in the situation. True, the Mapleton would identify me as the nephew of her old friend, thus putting the stopper on the stroll to the police station and the night in the prison cell, but when you came right down to it, a fat lot of use that was. The kid Clementina was presumably still out in the night somewhere, and she'd be lugged in and the full facts revealed, and then the burning glance, the few cold words, and the long letter to Aunt Agatha. I wasn't sure that a good straight term of penal servitude wouldn't have been a happier ending. So what with one consideration and another, the heart, as I toddled in through the front door, was more or less bowed down with weight of woe. We went along the passage and into the study, and there, standing behind a desk with the steel-rimmed spectacles glittering as nastily as on the day when I'd seen them across Aunt Agatha's luncheon table, was the boss in person. I gave her one swift look, then shut my eyes. "Ah," said Miss Mapleton. Now, uttered in a certain way, dragged out, if you know what I mean, and starting high up and going down into the lower register, the word "ah" can be as sinister and devastating as the word "oh." In fact, it is a very moot question which is the scalier. But what stunned me was that this wasn't the way she had said it. It had been, or my ears deceived me, a genial "ah," a matey "ah," the "ah" of one old buddy to another. And this startled me so much that, forgetting the dictates of prudence, I actually ventured to look at her again. And a stifled exclamation burst from Bertram's lips. The breathtaking exhibit before me was in person a bit on the short side. I mean to say, she didn't tower above me or anything like that, but to compensate for this lack of inches, she possessed, to a remarkable degree, that sort of quiet air of being unwilling to stand any ranny-gazoo which females who run schools always have. I'd noticed the same thing when, in statu pupillary, in my old headmaster, one glance from whose eye had invariably been sufficient to make me confess all. Sergeant majors are like that too. Also traffic cops and some post office girls. It's something in the way they purse their lips and look through you. In short, through years of disciplining the young, ticking off Isabel and speaking with quiet severity to Gertrude and that sort of thing, Miss Mapleton had acquired in the process of time rather the air of a female lion-tamer. And it was this air which had caused me, after the first swift look, to shut my eyes and utter a short prayer. But now, though she still resembled a lion-tamer, her bearing had most surprisingly become that of a chummy lion-tamer, who, after tucking the lions in for the night, relaxes in the society of the boys. "So you didn't find them, Mr. Wooster," she said. "I'm sorry, but I'm none the less grateful for the trouble you've taken, nor lacking in appreciation of your courage. I consider that you have behaved splendidly." I felt the mouth opening feebly and the vocal cords twitching, but I couldn't manage to say anything. I was simply unable to follow her train of thought. I was astonished, amazed, in fact, dumbfounded about sums it up. The hellhound of the law gave a sort of yelp, rather like a wolf that sees its Russian peasant getting away. "You identify this young man, ma'am?" "Identify him? In what way identify him?" Jeeves joined the symposium. "I fancy the officer is under the impression, madam, that Mr. Wooster was in your garden for some unlawful purpose. I informed him that Mr. Wooster was the nephew of your friend Mrs. Spencer Gregson, but he refused to credit me." There was a pause. Miss Mapleton eyed the constable for an instant as if she'd caught him sucking acid drops during the scripture lesson. "Do you mean to tell me, officer," she said in a voice that hit him just under the third button of the tunic and went straight through to the spinal column, "that you have had the imbecility to bungle this whole affair by mistaking Mr. Wooster for a burglar?" "He was up a tree, ma'am." "And why should he not be up a tree? No doubt you'd climbed the tree in order to watch the better, Mr. Wooster." I could answer that. The first shock over the old sang-froid was beginning to return. "Yes, rather, that's it, of course. Certainly, absolutely," I said. "Watch the better. That's it in a nutshell." "I took the liberty of suggesting that to the officer, madam, but he declined to accept the theory as tenable." "The officer is a fool," said Miss Mapleton. It seemed a close thing for a moment whether or not she'd rap him on the knuckles with a ruler. "By this time, no doubt, owing to his idiocy, the miscreants have made good their escape, and it is for this," said Miss Mapleton, "that we pay rates and taxes." "Awful," I said. "Iniquitous." "A bally shame." "A crying scandal," said Miss Mapleton. "A grim show," I agreed. In fact, we were just becoming more like a couple of lovebirds than anything, when through the open window there suddenly breezed a noise. I'm never at my best at describing things. At school, when we used to do essays and English composition, my report generally read, "Has little or no ability, but does his best," or words to that effect. True, in the course of years I've picked up a vocabulary of sorts from Jeeves, but even so I'm not nearly hot enough to draw a word picture that would do justice to that extraordinarily hefty crash. Try to imagine the Albert Hall falling on the Crystal Palace, and you'll have got the rough idea. All four of us, even Jeeves, sprang several inches from the floor. The policeman uttered a startled "Ho!" Miss Mapleton was her calm, masterful self again in a second. "One of the men appears to have fallen through the conservatory roof," she said. "Perhaps you will endeavour at the 11th hour to justify your existence, officer, by proceeding there and making investigations." "Yes, ma'am." "And try not to bungle matters this time." "No, ma'am." "Please hurry, then. Do you intend to stand here gaping all night?" "Yes, ma'am." "No, ma'am." "Yes, ma'am." It was pretty to hear him. "It's an odd coincidence, Mr. Wooster," said Miss Mapleton, becoming instantly matey once more as the outcast removed himself. "I'd just finished writing a letter to your aunt when you arrived. I shall certainly reopen it to tell her how gallantly you have behaved tonight. I have not in the past entertained a very high opinion of the modern young man, but you have caused me to alter it. To track these men unarmed through a dark garden argues courage of a high order, and it was most courteous of you to think of calling upon me. I appreciate it. Are you making a long stay in Bingley?" This was another one I could answer. "No," I said, "afraid not. Must be in London tomorrow." "Perhaps you could lunch before your departure." "Afraid not, thanks most awfully. Very important engagement that I can't get out of, eh, Jeeves?" "Yes, sir." "Have to catch the 10:30 train, what?" "Without fail, sir." "I'm sorry," said Miss Mapleton. "I had hoped that you would be able to say a few words to my girls. Some other time, perhaps?" "Absolutely. You must let me know when you're coming to Bingley again." "When I come to Bingley again," I said, "I will certainly let you know." "If I remember your plans correctly, sir, you are not likely to be in Bingley for some little time, sir." "Not for some considerable time, Jeeves," I said. The front door closed. I passed a hand across the brow. "Tell me all, Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" I said, "Tell me all. I am fogged." "It's quite simple, sir. I ventured to take the liberty on my own responsibility of putting into operation the alternative scheme which, if you remember, I wished to outline to you." "What was it?" "It occurred to me, sir, that it would be most judicious for me to call at the back door and desire an interview with Miss Mapleton. This, I fancy, would enable me, while the maid had gone to convey my request to Miss Mapleton, to introduce the young lady into the house unobserved." "And did you?" "Yes, sir. She proceeded up the back stairs and is now safely in bed." I frowned. The thought of the kid Clementina jarred upon me. "She is she?" I said. "A murrin on her, Jeeves, and may she be stood in the corner next Sunday for not knowing her collect. And then you saw Miss Mapleton?" "Yes, sir." "And told her that I was out in the garden chivying burglars with my bare hands?" "Yes, sir." "And had been on my way to call upon her?" "Yes, sir." "And now she's busy adding a postscript to her letter to Aunt Agatha, speaking of me in terms of unstinted praise?" "Yes, sir." I drew a deep breath. It was too dark for me to see the superhuman intelligence which must have been sloshing about all over the surface of the man's features. I tried to, but couldn't make it. "Jeeves," I said, "I should have been guided by you from the first." "It might have spared you some temporary unpleasantness, sir." "Unpleasantness is right. When the lantern shone up at me in the silent night, Jeeves, just as I'd finished poising the pot, I thought I'd unshipped the rib." "Jeeves?" "Sir?" "That Antibes expedition is off." "I'm glad to hear it, sir." "If young Bobby Wickham can get me into a mess like this in a quiet spot like Bingley-on-Sea, what might she not be able to accomplish at a really lively resort like Antibes?" "Precisely, sir. Miss Wickham, as I have sometimes said, though a charming—" "Yes, yes, Jeeves, there's no necessity to stress the point. The Wooster eyes are definitely opened." I hesitated. "Jeeves?" "Sir?" "Those +4s." "Yes, sir." "You may give them to the poor." "Thank you very much, sir." I sighed. "It's my heart's blood, Jeeves.
I appreciate the sacrifice, sir. But once the first pang of separation is over, you'll feel much easier without them. You think so? I'm convinced of it, sir. So be it then, Jeeves, I said. So be it.
This ends Jeeves and the Kid Clementina.